Hello, welcome to Global with me, David Eads. The death of David Bowie has come as a shock to all but those closest to him. For 18 months he was struggling with cancer, and his death brings to an end the life of one of the most inspirational music performers of the last 50 years. He didn't tend to describe himself as a musician, more an artist, as he proved through video, film, fashion and of course his songs. He was also an artist who constantly reinvented himself through his many alter egos and his love of musical innovation. Well, in just a moment, we'll speak to one of his producers. First, though, David Silito takes this look back at his life.
Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Oh man, look at those cavemen go.
Where do you start? The songs, the ever-changing appearance, the blurred sexuality, the mystique. If you want to understand the look and feel of the 70s, David Bowie is as good a place to begin as any. And now he's gone. A single message from his son Duncan. Very sorry and sad to say it's true. I'll be offline for a while. Love to all. He died, it said, peacefully, surrounded by family, after an 18-month battle with cancer.
Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do.
What was it that made Bowie so special? This is the moment in 1973 when he killed off Ziggy Stardust, a pop character. There were gasps. Despair. It wasn't just the music. He was like an alien who had arrived to rewrite the rules of what you could do, how you could look. A few months later, he reappeared with an entirely different look and sound.
I felt really comfortable going on stage as somebody else, and it seemed a rational decision to keep on doing that. And so I got quite besotted with the idea of just creating character after character.
Time is waiting in the wind.
Soul music, Jacques Brel, Anthony Newley. He was a musical jackdaw. He'd studied mime, hung out with Iggy Pop and Lou Reed, and at one point he changed his entire sound in the middle of a tour.
If you take this assignment, you'll have complete authority.
And in The Man Who Fell to Earth, he played an alien struggling to relate to the world he was in. It was alarmingly close to real life. He was falling apart. Drugs were taking over. He had to escape. He went to Berlin and with Brian Eno created music that the critics adored. But this was about much more than just the music.
It was an extraordinary fusion of absolutely brilliant music. You know, you can't forget what a fabulous lyricist he was, what an interesting lyricist, you know. The way that he poured different aspects of art into the presentation of his music. He was the absolute sort of definitive fusion of pop music, fashion and art.
What came next was the era of video. Again, Bowie was ahead of the pack. And this was the peak of his chart success. His new, clean-cut, MTV-friendly style made money, but didn't make him happy.
Artistically and aesthetically, it was probably my lowest point.
If he was worried he'd become too mainstream, the noise created by his Tin Machine project solved that problem. In the 90s, he embraced a new invention, the internet. But his appearances in public gradually became rarer and rarer. Then, unexpectedly, a final burst of creativity. An older, frailer Bowie, but still recognisably the man who always wanted to move forward. That restless desire to change. His echoes are all around us in the landscape of pop culture. Influential is almost an understatement when it comes to David Bowie.
Well, a great British pop icon, but he spent the last few years of his life in New York. And Laura Trevelyan joins us now from outside his home in Soho, New York. I see the tributes to Laura already coming in.
Yes, David, the floral tributes, the candles, the dedications have been building all morning as fans are coming, New Yorkers and tourists alike. One of the first people here this morning was a Norwegian tourist who I spoke to. She said she woke up, she heard the news, she burst into tears, and she knew that she had to come here because David Bowie's music had been the soundtrack of her life. The next person here laying flowers was a British expat who lives in the neighbourhood who said that David Bowie's music had been the soundtrack to her life. And fans of all ages have been here this morning, some very young who couldn't possibly even have been born during the 1970s, but who identify very closely with David Bowie's chameleon-like qualities. And he was, as you said, a New Yorker in his last years, and not only a musician, but also an extremely influential figure in the theatre. He played the lead in The Elephant Man. He has currently a Broadway an off-Broadway musical called Lazarus that he co-wrote. So David Bowie, a figure who is being mourned here. People have been saying to me just what an emotional day this is for his fans, David.
Well, I think we're getting that sense around the world as well. Laura, thanks very much indeed for that. In fact, we've been speaking to collaborators, fans of David Bowie through the course of the day, and I got the reaction of Sam Wolfson from Vice UK here in the studio. But first, I heard from Tim Palmer, who's in Texas. Tim's a music producer who worked with Bowie.
In his lifetime of art and music and fashion, I mean, I think he achieved more in one life than most people could do in about 5, you know.
He was an extraordinary... I mean, in a way, that's one of the points about him, wasn't it? You could never pin him down as this type of artist or that type of artist.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, as you explained in the video that you just played, there were so many transitions in the characters and the people that he became. I was very fortunate to be involved in one of those transitional periods, which was the critically panned, as you said, Tin Machine.
I was hoping you might not have noticed that bit.
But what was important at that time was that he, as the video said, David felt he was at the low point of his career, and the Tin Machine sort of set a light under him again, and got a fire going back to onto the next section of his life. And you know, it was for me, I was a 26-year-old guy, and David Bowie was 44 at that time, and you know, to get that phone call from the management saying David Bowie's about to call you at home was quite a shocking day for me, and I nearly blew the whole thing, to be honest, because I had the chat with David, and he said, would you be interested in coming to work with me on these 2 albums? And of course I jumped at that opportunity, but I didn't make a proper note of the actual date that I was due to fly out. I was so in awe of working with one of my musical heroes that I didn't write it down. Well, so the day before I was flying, I got a phone call from the studio in Switzerland saying, Monsieur Tim Palmer, David Bowie is waiting for you. We all set up ready to go. And I had to make that call to David without having met him at that point at all and say, well, I'm sorry, mate, I missed the flight.
Tim, we've got a picture here of the two of you. You obviously look like you got on extremely well. Just give us an insight as to what he was like in terms of working, in producing music with him. What was his, sort of, for you, the defining characteristic of Bowie?
Well, I mean, one of the things that, you know, we can never overlook is the fact that he was an incredible vocalist. I mean, he had all these different personas, but he was an amazing singer. And I remember being in the studio on one of the Tin Machine records, and he was singing on a song called Amlapura, and it was a very sad sort of type song. And he sung this vocal, and I listened to it, and I thought, in my opinion, it was great. And I said to David, are you happy with that? And he said no. And he was not content with it. And I said, well, what do you feel is wrong with it? And he told me that he felt it wasn't quite sad enough. And I said, may I ask you how you think that you will make this vocal sadder? And he went out and he sung the vocal again, just slightly flat, to give a sort of melancholy, sadder vibe to this music. And I've never in my 35 years as a record producer seen a vocalist be able to re-sing a vocal perfectly, just slightly flatter. And it did give that feeling of just sadness to the song, and that's incredible, I think.
That's the genius, I guess, of a very, very fine musician. I mean, there were some pretty bleak periods in his life, I think it's fair to say. Nonetheless, when you think of David Bowie, the friend you had, what was he like to mess around with?
Well, I was very fortunate to enter his very private world for that short period of time. His death came as a shock to me because I wasn't aware of his cancer. You know, it was quite incredible that when we were making those records, I remember once being at lunch at my mother-in-law's house, Sunday lunch, and she ran out to answer the phone, and she came back through and said, "Tim, there's a phone call from," I think he said his name was David Bowie. So I ran out to the phone, and he just rang to tell a joke. That's the sort of guy he was, you know. And there was many other opportunities for me to, you know, sit and have dinner with a guy like that. It was just incredible. He made a massive influence on my career.
Well, inevitably, yeah. Look, also with us, don't go away, Tim, but with us in the studio is Sam Wolfson, who's executive editor of Vice UK. Sam, some nice tales there, and you get a sense of the influence he had. What about the impact he has had on bands that have perhaps listened to him when they were young and are now in their pomp?
Sure. Well, I think just the whole language of pop music he's kind of defined, you know, everything that we think of in terms of what makes a pop artist, what makes a pop song, the way that he played with gender, the way that he talked about the fragility of the human condition, the way that he talked about sort of big things that maybe hadn't been that involved in sort of pop writing before, ideas about war and the future and technology, and the way that he incorporated those into his songs. Now those have become like, that's the bar for a critically acclaimed pop album. You know, he really set the whole language of how pop songs were written.
I saw a quote from him saying that the trouble with rock is we're 10 years behind art and the rest of culture, and his clearly part of his mission seemed to be, let's bring it right up to date, and that put him perhaps 10 years ahead of everyone else.
Absolutely, and I think sort of throughout his career, he was very, you know, embracing of technology, embracing of new styles. Some of his sort of less critically acclaimed stuff in the 90s, when you look back now, was actually picking up on sort of underground culture and drum and bass music and all things that were very much not in the mainstream. And I think if you look at a lot of his contemporaries, you know, they've got to a certain age and they hit the kind of hard rock cafe circuit and start playing big reunion shows and just play the hits kind of thing. And he was just never interested in that till his last album, you know, which only came out last week. It's an alternative record. It's weird. It's futuristic. It uses technology in a way that not many artists are doing, and I think that's why he's always had such a high critical response.
Let me ask you a question, Sam. If we go back to Let's Dance, for example, which I think commercially was probably his biggest success in terms of the amount of money that brought in for him, but of course a lot of his diehard fans felt, right, he's sold out here.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to enjoy Let's Dance?
Oh, I think we really are, and I think that, you know, one of the things about music is stuff goes in and out of fashion, and absolutely there was a period where people saw that as a bit of a sellout era, and now I think a lot of you know, the big pop producers and the big, you know, in terms of R&B and American pop and hip hop, look at Let's Dance as such a incredible bit of pop production that it's kind of had a bit of a renaissance. And I think
Sam Wolfson there of Vice UK. I was also talking to Tim Palmer, the music producer and friend of David Bowie. There are a lot more tributes and memories, recollections of Bowie himself. If you go to the website, we've got our dedicated page, very easy to get to, bbc.com/David Bowie.